Welcome back to True Crime with Andy Hale. I've got a really fascinating guest on today. Jia Rizvi, documentary filmmaker, podcaster, entrepreneur, jack of all trades. I got to tell you, Jia, you have really impressed and inspired me because we're going to talk about why. And with this whole idea that you just didn't know anything and you made a documentary film blows me away. And people know I've had Jeff Deskovic on this podcast talking about his wrongful conviction. Jia made a documentary film about it that is not out yet. There's no doubt it's going to land somewhere because it's so powerful. Jia, anyway, welcome to True Crime.
Thanks for having me, Andy. This is awesome.
So I don't even know where to begin. I mean, we met at CrimeCon, I think the one in Orlando, two CrimeCons ago, and you were there to kind of premiere the short version of your film. At that point, the film was how long and what was the title?
The title was Conviction. Well, the title is Conviction. It's a 21-minute short, and that one did release. That one went out on Amazon Prime. So people can see that one there. But then because there was such positive momentum and feedback from that one, I kept filming for years afterwards and actually worked on a feature film, which is called 16 Years and it's on also Jeff's story. And that's the one that we just completed that is not out yet.
Okay, so let's go back in time. How do you even, before you became a documentary filmmaker, what was your career? What were you doing?
I had almost a 20-year career in the fashion industry, and I was doing communications and sales development for a bunch of major brands.
Okay, this actually kind of bleeds over to my Connect podcast too, because I'm encouraging people on that podcast to follow their passions, do things that they want to do. So you're in that industry. How in the world do you pivot to, how do you learn about Jeff's case for one? And then what makes you think in your mind, like, hey, I should do like a documentary film about this?
Yeah, so the pivot happened somewhat naturally. I was pregnant, and so I wasn't working for a little while. And during that time, my husband came home and said, "You got to listen to this podcast. It's called Serial." And I automatically said no, because I didn't listen to podcasts weren't a thing back then. Like Serial is
Yeah.
what
Serial
podcasts on the
was
map.
the OG. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so I never listened to podcasts. So I just said, nah, I'm not interested. And he was like, no, no, no. This is a true crime podcast. And it's about a Pakistani family. And so my family's Pakistani. And that kind of got my interest because in our culture, it's very much you don't air your dirty laundry. You don't talk about things that are not okay. And so I thought, how in the world is a true crime is a Pakistani family involved in true crime, and how has that been aired? And so that is what piqued my interest. And so I said, sure, let's listen. I listened to the first, I think at this point in time, there was 2 or 3 episodes out. I don't remember how many exactly. I listened to those and I was hooked. Like the rest of the world, I was hooked.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I said,
So
play
well
the next
done.
one. It's so well done. It's
Yeah.
so well done. It's so well done production.
It's still a very high bar, I think, compared to today. I mean, it's still to me one of the best podcasts in terms of storytelling and the way it's done. It's just so good. But anyway, yeah, go ahead.
Yes, in terms of storytelling, it's so well done and so engaging. They did drop the ball on some things that irked me even in the time being. And fast
Yeah.
forward to today, I'll tell
Yeah, I
you
know it's been a
why.
little, it's gotten some criticism maybe for, how some of the case was handled.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. And that's my kind of beef with it as well, that,
Mhm.
if there is any to be had.
But let me
But
pause you there.
anyways,
I do think, and I'm not picking sides, because I'm big in wanting podcasts to be really factual correct. But what that podcast did, for sure, it shined a light on the case. It brought
100%.
millions of eyeballs and ears to the case. And I think that was the true intention, was to really let's talk about it. Let's start a discussion about it, and then we
Yep.
can take a deeper dive.
You're 100% right. That case would never be where it is today
Yeah.
had it not been for Serial. So regardless of some of the facts and some of the, things that they said that maybe were not 100% accurate, they did a fantastic job. But anyway, so I listened to that podcast, and at the same time, Making a Murder and Jinx were really big on TV. And I was
Yeah.
watching those as well.
Yeah.
And I listened to Serial and I was completely heartbroken by Adnan's story. And I thought I grew up with two brothers, and I thought this could have been my brothers. If they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, it would have been them. He's the same age, same stories, same. I related to it so much. And so I wanted to do something to help him. And I organized the very first in-person legal defense fundraiser for Adnan. And I did that here in New
Wow.
York.
Wow.
Yeah, and I worked in fashion, so I didn't know what to do. So I created free Adnan shirts. Those shirts went viral all over the world,
Really? I
literally.
don't even think I knew that.
Yeah,
Really?
I created those shirts. Yes, yes.
Wow.
And it's crazy because the number of orders I started, we donated all of the funds from it. That's part of how we were fundraising. And it got to the point where I was packaging like 1,000 shirts in my apartment. I was like, I can't do this. What is happening right now? And anyway, so that's a whole nother story. But that's how I got involved with Adnan's family. We did the first fundraiser. We raised a few $1,000s in one night, and they at the time hadn't received much money. That was the largest donation back then. Now they've raised, you know, $250,000 or more or something. But at the time, you know, we became close, the family and I, until this day. You know, I consider them like family. They're wonderful. And so when Adnan had his post-conviction hearing, shortly thereafter, I went. And so I was in the courtroom with his family, and I saw so much corruption in the way the prosecutor was handling Asia McClain, Adnan's alibi witness.
Mm.
And I was beside myself. This was the first time I had sat in any courtroom that was a murder trial. And this wasn't even the trial, this was just the post-conviction hearing, but related to someone's murder conviction. And I was so upset by what I saw. And it was 5 days long. And at the end of it, on one of the last days, the second to last day, I was driving with Adnan's mom, Shamim, and his brother Yusuf, and they would take me every day and bring me back every day. And we were leaving, and Shamim said to me, I don't understand what's happening. And I was like, what? It's day 4 of 5 days. And this mom, this poor mother, doesn't know what's happening. And so I explained it to her in our language, in Urdu, and I said, you know, they're doing the same thing they did to him 18, 19 years ago. They're railroading him. They're trying to hide his alibi witness. They're not giving him a fair chance. And she was like, oh, that's what's happening. And in that moment, I was so heartbroken for her. And I realized that my own parents came here from the same country, and any immigrants that come here that don't have a grasp on the language, let alone legal jargon, would be in this position. And I thought, you know, it's my duty to be that bridge and help people if I can. And so I was racking my brain on the bus ride back to New York from Baltimore, thinking, what more can I do than just a small fundraiser that helps one person and doesn't even help him that much, because a few $1,000s doesn't go far in the legal world as it is. And I realized that the jinx and making a murder were so big and reached so many people. And I thought, you know what? That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make films because I'll just reach more people that way. So I came home, did some Googling, and saw that New York Film Academy had a workshop program to teach you documentary filmmaking. I enrolled in it. And by this time, my son was like 8 months old. And I would take him in tow in a carrier with the camera equipment, drop him off at daycare near the school, go to school, pick him up, come home, and just do this every day. And I just learned everything that I could in that short workshop program.
Let me pause there. There's so many things about that that are so amazing. If we could bottle whatever's inside you, we could just bottle it up. That the first part that I think is incredible is, I mean, a lot of people were interested in the Serial, you know, podcast and the case, and they were avid listeners, and they, you know, supported the cause. But you went so far above and beyond by doing a fundraiser. You actually met the family. You're going to court. I mean, the level of commitment and the passion you showed, that's such a secret sauce, I think, to success, is people that have, they are, whatever your interest is, something lights a fire and you're passionate about it, and you feel a sense of purpose and you really need to do something. That is such a powerful, powerful quality to have. And so it's so inspiring to hear you like talk like that, but then even more so, and this would even apply to me. I think it's very intimidating to think like, how am I going to learn the skills to be a filmmaker? I mean, it just seems overwhelming to me with the camera and the technology and all the different things. And you had no experience in that whatsoever. You already had this 2-decade plus career. And what I love is you went about it with no fear. Like I'm just going to learn it. Like you didn't, it didn't sound like there's any doubts about why not? Like, you just let me just do this. I just find that incredibly inspirational. It's just amazing to me.
You know, so there was one thing. When I was leaving Baltimore, I was like, what more can I do? And I have done photography for 20 years. And so I knew my way around a camera. And
Okay, that
that's
helps.
why,
That
yes,
helps.
that's why I thought, oh, let me mute this. That's why I thought, let me use the skills I have. What skills do I have? And the skill I had was I knew my way around a camera.
So when
So
you decided to go to this, to start learning filmmaking and documentary filmmaking, did you have a case in mind, or it was more just like, I want to just be able to get these skills so that I can story tell down the road?
the only case I had in mind was the non's case. I wanted to help them in any way that I could. I was so heartbroken for his mom, and I could relate to them so much because I have a similar background and, because of my brother. So the case I had in mind, my dream project was to make a documentary on a non's case, and still is, because there are things I think that need to be told in a certain
You
way
should.
that
So
I,
what happens next? You sign up for the class, you start learning documentary filmmaking, and then what happens?
So when I had done the fundraiser for Adnan initially, my friend introduced me to Jeff Deskovic, and she said,
Uh,
I know a guy who has almost the same story as Adnan. Uncanny how similar their stories are. And I said I would love to meet him because we were looking for a speaker for the fundraiser. I met Jeff that very day, and he spoke at our fundraiser. He was amazing. And so he was the only person that I actually personally knew that had this lived experience. So when I rolled into New York Film Academy, I went in with a vengeance. I was like, I am not gonna, even if I get poor grades, I am not gonna do the assignments they assign me. I'm gonna film everything that has to do with wrongful convictions. My goal was
yeah,
not to get a good grade in school. My goal
right,
was to
right.
make documentaries on wrongful convictions. And so every project they gave us, I went and filmed it at like the detention center downtown in Manhattan, or like anything they gave us, I related it somehow to what I wanted to film, which really paid off because I used it all as B-roll in my
Did
film.
you did you know then when you were doing that you wanted to highlight Jeff's case?
I called Jeff right away. So it was very short. It was a 6-week program, this
Wow,
school.
wow.
And so 2 weeks in, when they started telling us what our final exam would be to make a short film, I reached out to Jeff and I said, would you let me follow you around and film you for a short doc I'm working on? And he said, sure. And so I started filming Jeff early on, and then all the B-roll I had from the earlier assignments I was able to use in
Wow.
Jeff's doc.
The thing is, and I mean, I know I'm preaching to the choir with you. Jeff's case, Jeff Deskovic is to me the poster boy of wrongful convictions. I mean, it's a DNA exoneration, right?
Yep.
So we absolutely know Jeff is innocent. He was wrongfully convicted. We know that he falsely confessed. So that just proves that some people do falsely confess. There's various factors and reasons why that happens, but it does happen. Um, Law enforcement can kind of sometimes get the blinders on, get stuck to a certain narrative. His case, I had heard I had met Jeff several times. I'd been to New York to meet him before I was at Crime Con and met you. I'd met Jeff in New York. I had heard his story. I talked to Jeff about his story. So I was familiar with all that. But I got to say, when you showed that short at Crime Con in Orlando, I cried. I remember I have looked at Jeff Deskovic differently ever since I saw your film. Like, I knew he was wrongfully convicted. I knew he had this incredibly sad injustice happen to him. But whenever I see him now, I have a whole I just feel him now. I feel his story because of your film. Like, the hair on my arms now, like, you can't even see it. Like, it gives me goosebumps to talk about it because that's the power of film. That's the power of storytelling. Like, I read about Jeff's story. I even heard about Jeff's story from Jeff, but he could not tell it the way you told it so powerfully. I got to say, it was so well done. It really moved me. I'm telling you this from the heart. I told you this there, but right after the film, I went over and saw Jeff and gave him a hug, and we just hugged. And I just had tears going down my cheek the whole time.
Eddie, first of all, you did say that to me in Orlando at CrimeCon, and I appreciated you so much and your words so much, which is, I think, why we connected so much so quickly. I so appreciate that. And you know what Jeff told me? I was with him this past week. We were traveling, and he told me that his girlfriend's kids, she has 2 kids, and they saw the film last week. when we played it in with the feature film in New York for the cast and crew. And his girlfriend's son came up and said a very similar thing to him and said, I understand you now. And
Yeah.
that meant so much to me, so
Yeah.
much, because, and you know, Jeff can have a difficult personality at times. And he knows that. I've said this to him. Jeff and I have had a 10-year wonderful friendship. So we tell each other anything and everything. So he knows this. And I always say that I give Jeff a pass on anything that he says odd or does that may seem difficult, because he grew up in prison.
Yeah.
He had to grow up in prison. It's not his fault, you know, and therefore he can't always maybe articulate his story maybe in the way that I can, because I don't have that history that he has. So I can look at it from the outside looking in,
Well,
you know.
I actually think Jeff is incredibly smart and articulate
He is.
and amazing, considering he spent 16 years in prison at such a young age. And then why don't you just, I jumped into this episode kind of assuming people knew Jeff's story. Why don't you just give the short version of what happened to Jeff?
Yes.
For anybody listening who may not know Jeff's story.
Yes. And before I do, I want to just clarify, Jeff is so smart and so articulate. I agree with you. Jeff said to me himself that sometimes when he talks about his story, he has to disassociate so much. It's almost like he's talking about somebody else because
Jeff
of the
is so
trauma.
smart. I think that, that's why his story, he tells his story, I think, very matter-of-factly.
Matter of fact, yeah.
He tells it very kind of like technically.
Yes.
About what happened to him technically. And he says it with just kind of like a certain sophistication that you don't feel his pain the way you should. And that's why the movie showed how vulnerable he was, showed you how emotional it was, showed you how heartbreaking it was, which you couldn't have done if you didn't have that film. You could not have told Jeff's story robustly, yeah. So
Yeah.
for people who are listening to this who really aren't familiar with Jeff's story, give them the short version.
Yeah, Jeff was a 16-year-old student at Peekskill High School, and during a photography assignment, one of his classmates, Angela Correa, went out to take photos. Her photography partner, because they sent them out in pairs, didn't show up that day, so she went by herself. Unfortunately, she went out into the woods to take photographs, and somebody raped and murdered her. When the police came to get information from students at Peekskill High, other students unfortunately told the detectives that Jeff was odd and maybe a little weird, and so they should look into him. And that was it. And then the detectives got tunnel vision and they just focused on Jeff, and they did not investigate the case, and they ignored evidence that would have pointed to the right person. And Jeff got convicted of rape and murder.
He wanted confessing, right? They got him to confess to the crime.
They did.
Yeah.
By not giving him food and threatening him.
Like, you're going to help us be like a little junior detective. We're going to help you solve the crime. And then they got him. And basically, this is the crazy part. And this is what I tell people. And I do a lot of work for the state of Chicago, and I've been on both sides of wrongful convictions. It's real. We can debate how often it happens. I mean, not everybody who says they were forced to confess falsely confessed, but there's lots of documented cases out there where people have. And so my point is, it is real. People say like, oh, I would never confess to a crime I didn't commit. You know what? Until you are in those circumstances that person's in, where you've been charged with, murder or whatever it is, you don't know what you would do. And to think that Jeff confessed to the crime and then gets convicted is unbelievable. Thank God that they finally did what it was DNA testing, right? That led to the real killer.
Yeah.
And Jeff got exonerated. And then what's so amazing about Jeff's story is he gets out and then he actually goes to law school. And then he goes through law school, graduates, becomes a lawyer, and then starts his own innocence clinic. It's just, you could not script that. Like
I know.
His life story is, it would be something you and I, if we were just writing a fictional account, say, hey, let's have this thing with this young high school kid. He gets convicted. He falsely confesses. He gets exonerated. He goes to law school. He starts an innocence clinic. I would probably say to you like, oh, Gia, this sounds a little hokey. Like,
it's not realistic. Yes.
Yeah, we can't have all these things happen. And that's what happened to Jeff.
Yes. And he came out of prison and was almost homeless at one point in time, and had no money and nowhere to go, and got a scholarship at Mercy College. And that and then, led him to get his degree. But then he went on to start his own Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation of Justice to help other people, because he was like, I can't leave these people behind. There's other innocent people. And he didn't have a law degree. So he thought, this is what I can do. And he freed people far before being a lawyer, and then became a lawyer, and now has freed even more people. And for any one human being to be able to free 14, 15 human beings from prison is such an insane accomplishment. I have no
feel like
words.
Jeff Deskovic should be, I told him this, I feel like he should be, anywhere he goes, he should be recognized by everybody. I mean, he is, his story and his work is so amazing. I don't think it's gotten the recognition.
Right.
I mean, not that he's not looking for it, but I just think he's entitled to it. His story is so powerful. And that's why I want to raise awareness of Jeff and what happened to Jeff, his case, the work he's doing now. And that's why I think your short film was so powerful. So tell me then, how did you pivot from, you did the short film, which was what, 20 minutes?
Yep.
And then you talked a little bit about it, but then how do you go from that to where you are now? Explain that process.
So when I was editing the short, there was so much footage that we had to cut out because Jeff's story is just so robust, right? And the lucky thing was at New York Film Academy, the professors were incredible. Like, some of the professors there are the people who worked on the Ruth Bader Ginsburg doc, the Free Solo doc, have all kinds of films they've done. So,
Great ones,
yeah, to have like people of that caliber, I wasn't in those two classes, but they have other professors of that caliber. To have the professors look at your work was so helpful, by the way, which is why I was able to do this, because the caliber of the people that were teaching me. But also, they watched it and they said, when you're making a short, it has to focus on one aspect, because it's too short of a time for people to take in all that is part of Jeff's story. So you got to pick one thing. So I picked reintegration, what it's like for an innocent person to come out and reintegrate into society. And that's all that the short focuses on. That's it. But of course, with Jeff, there's false confessions. There's, the murder of an innocent woman, a girl. There's all the things that went wrong in the justice system, layers and layers and layers, where the DNA testing was denied. Why was it denied? There's so much that couldn't get into the short, because it wouldn't have made sense to do so. So I had all this footage already that I didn't want to cut out, but I had to cut out. And so I thought, I'm going to keep working on this story. And then I kept interviewing Jeff, because as I worked on the story further, I had more questions and more questions. And so we kept doing these interviews. And then I interviewed a guy named Freddie Claxton, who is such a wonderful human being. The detectives first interviewed Freddie. He was a classmate, and they tried to pin it on him first. But luckily, his dad knew better and was like, get my son out of there. You have no rights to talk to him. He needs a lawyer, and took Freddie out of there. Then they put their eyes on Jeff, and Jeff actually grew up without a father, and he didn't have someone to take him out of that room, and he didn't know better. And
That's
he
the terrible
trusted
part.
cops.
Right, exactly. He
It's
just
terrible.
got left, and he was so vulnerable.
He was so vulnerable. He even said, I looked at them like father figures because I didn't have one.
And so you decided then to make a
The feature
feature
version.
to tell the whole story.
Yep.
So how long did you work on that? How long did that take?
It actually took about 4 years, but we were halted for 2 years because of COVID. So it would have been done in about a year and a half, 2 years. But it was, for 2 years, we had complete halt the whole project because nobody wanted to interview and sit in a room that close together.
So now you are in the process of basically chopping it around and trying to see where it might land.
Yes, exactly.
And it's where are you hoping? Like, what's your wish list? Just to have it out there so that most people can see it.
Yeah, that's really it. I don't really care which streaming platform it ends up on.
I'm the same way. It's like, you just want to get it out there so people can see it.
Yeah, that's it.
I got to tell you though, I mean, it's so good. You were kind enough to show it to me. It's so good. It should be anywhere and everywhere. It's really amazing. And I really hope, let's do a part 2 when it lands somewhere. We can come back and talk about, the impact it's having, the reception you're getting. Because I'm amazed at Jeff's story, and I'm amazed at your story, to be able to tell Jeff's story. You became like this mouthpiece visually for Jeff's story. It's just incredible. And so you're going to try to, that's your big priority now. And then what's the next chapter? Or is it too early to talk about the next chapter?
No, so right now I've been talking to a couple of lawyers to see which cases they have for someone who's wrongfully incarcerated currently. And I want to start working on their story because my goal is actually that to raise awareness. My first goal was just to raise awareness and get people to help the cause of wrongful convictions. And so, when people like you say that it moved you that way, it makes me feel so fulfilled. My next goal is to tell the story of someone who's currently incarcerated wrongfully, so that I can hopefully help their case and add in any small way to get them freedom.
Yeah. So it's kind of what happened, with my first documentary, Murder in the Park. We did that when Story Simon was in prison.
Yes.
And I mean, I think there's no doubt that the documentary is what basically caused the state's attorney's office to finally take a serious look at the case, roll their sleeves up, dig in and investigate. And it led to his exoneration. So these films are powerful. I mean, they make a difference. And so I encourage you and I applaud you for the work you're doing. Let's continue this conversation later this year when you've got, more to talk about with where Jeff's case lands. But it was so good chatting with you. It's so inspirational. I think what you did to champion Jeff's case is truly phenomenal. And I can't wait to see where it lands and to watch it again.
And thank you so much, Andy. And right back at you. Your work is so inspirational.
To be continued, Jia. All right.
For sure.
To be continued. Thanks, everybody. We'll be back soon.